Going to record. Fantastic. And welcome everyone this afternoon to this joint presentation by AOC and our colleagues from IOE at UCL. And we're just going to do a few introductions before we kick off in terms of our overview presentation today on our Nuffield survey, which is looking at the experiences of 14 to 16-year-olds in further education. So I'm your chair for today, and my name's Kath Sazen. I'm Interim Director for Education at the Association of Colleges. And perhaps really importantly, in terms of this particular project, when I worked in college for 14 years, and 13 of those were involved in working with 14 to 16-year-olds. If you remember the increased flexibility programs, and I also ran programs for alternative provision as well. So that's my particular interest in this topic. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Josie.
Thanks, Kath. Hi everyone, I'm Josie. I work at AOC on the projects team, and I'm the project manager for this project. Thanks.
Fantastic. And Julia?
Hi everyone, my name is Julia Begutai and I'm a Senior Policy Manager at the Association of Colleges, and my responsibility is with research and evidence. So I'll be contributing in a number of ways to this research project.
Thanks, Julia. And Lynn?
Hello everyone, I'm from IOE at UCL, and I've been working around this area about young people who might be slightly disengaged from education, particularly 14 to 19-year-olds for a very long time. And Kath and I together have spent many hours looking at 14 to 16 provision in colleges, and I've also been involved in alternative provision for quite a long time. So looking forward to meeting everybody as part of this.
Thanks, Lynn. And Susan?
Hi everyone, I'm Susan McGrath, and I began my career teaching in further education colleges, so I'm always very interested in research that involves the FE sector. My research interests are all connected to 14 to 19 education and work, and I've got a particular interest in things that help young people to make informed decisions, and more importantly to sustain them. So I'm very interested in research that can be embedded into schools and colleges so that more young people can benefit. And I'm really looking forward to this particular one.
Thanks ever so much. So we're going to go through a few slides outlining the project, and specifically this afternoon, later on in the slides, we're going to be focusing on our survey, which is the first part of the actual project analysis that we're going to be doing at the moment. And we'd very much like to get you involved in that. So we're hoping that you'd like to be working with us on that. So I am going to share screen. And here we go. So this afternoon, we are going to be looking at the AOC and UCL IOE Step Up to Success, an investigation and an examination of the impact of 14 to 16 college provision on individuals and their communities. So a project overview to start off with. This is really groundbreaking research on the combined experience of 14 to 16-year-old students studying in colleges. There is no coherent understanding of the curriculum and the wider support offered and what factors contribute to the success or otherwise of these young people. Sadly, as you will know, that without college provision, the likelihood of many of these young people dropping out and becoming NEET is high, and the long-term consequences of which are very well documented. So this research is set to address this evidence gap, and we very much like to thank the Nuffield Foundation who have funded this particular project. So what do we know about 14 to 16-year-olds from current data? So we know that over 100 English colleges deliver 14 to 16 provision. And this is broken down into 3 different categories. So we have direct entry, where students study 25 hours a week, and effectively the college is their home school. So it's as if they were at a school. So they do 25 hours a week. They will do English and maths. They may well do vocational subjects. They may do some other more sort of general curriculum type subjects like English, like science as well. And there are around 14 colleges that offer this provision and around 1,500 students. And then we have elective home education. So these students can study in college up to 16 hours per week. So it forms part of their elective home education. There are around 2,500 students on this provision in 69 colleges up and down the country. And I think it's fair to say that this is probably where we're seeing growth in 14 to 16 provision in colleges at the moment. Finally, we have alternative provision. This model varies from college to college and student to student, as you will well know if you deliver alternative provision. So it can be full-time, it can be part-time, but importantly, these students are enrolled at a home provider, normally a school, or possibly through the local authority. This is around 5,000 students currently and in 176 colleges across the country. So that gives an overview of a small but really significant number of young people who are educated other than in a mainstream or a special school as well, school environment. So I am now going to hand over to Lynn, who is going to take us through aims and approach. Lynn, I'm going to move you on to the next slide.
That'd be lovely. I mean, what all of us know here is the sort of immense vulnerability of many of these young learners. You know, those in alternative provision often have no choice. They might feel you know, neglected and isolated and have very little sense of themselves as a learner because they've frequently been excluded. And we do know that many young people are excluded from school for reasons that we might disagree with, or you know, just odd challenging incidents that's happened. You know, we know a reasonable amount about the direct entry students, partly because they're a small group, and both Kath and I have done some research into that group. But again, the provisions vary immensely in terms of the curriculum offer and the locality and how the provision fits into the wider school context. Where there is much less known is about young people who are, you know, home educated. What everybody does know is that they're very, very diverse as a cohort. But what is lacking completely is a real sort of robust evidence base that actually tries to identify really, really clearly where these people are studying, how many of them are there, and trying to demonstrate also the wealth of fantastic work that colleges are doing in a whole host of different ways, what works well for them, partly so that we can try to influence government. DFE know very little about this group of young students, and I know that Kath can talk about that because she's frequently in meetings where she's having to inform them. And partly this is about really trying to shine a light, a spotlight to celebrate the immense amount of work that you're doing. So it's quite a complex project in terms of the methodology. Partly we're trying to sort of map out all of the provisions so we can see you know, what's happening in different localities. Are there economic factors that are playing into this? What are the profile of the learners? We're trying to understand more about the progression and what helps these young people to move to further stages of their work, and really looking to see, you know, what is it about the provision that's being offered in colleges? What are the key factors that are enabling these students to flourish and progress? There are lots and lots of wonderful stories about young people who've really, really benefited from their time in college at 14 to 16, and whether that's because they like the much more practical approaches, they like doing more vocational work, and also the ethos. that we don't know really enough detail to be making solid claims or solid demands about what might benefit these young people for the best. So we're trying to really provide this strong evidence base, but also with real rich data from the learners themselves, so that they have a real voice in this. And I'm going to hand over to Susan now, who's going to talk to you in more depth about the overall view of the research. So we can have the next slide, Kath.
You could, but for some reason or another, my screen has frozen just because it seems to be very cold. So bear with me. I'm going to try and get it to move on. Let's see if it'll do this way. There we go.
I'm so relieved, because this would have been very difficult to talk through without the diagram, Kath. Okay, so Lynn has gone through the aims and said that it is quite a complex methodology. So what I'm going to do is try and just put that all into a kind of simpler and hopefully sensible format. So in terms of those aims, when it came to methodology, we distilled the things that Lynn has been talking about down into 4 main research questions. So these are in the blue boxes on the slide. And if I just say a little bit about what they were, the first question was really asking, what are the characteristics and profiles of these learners, and also whether they remain stable over time. The second research question was asking about the educational offer that these young people are receiving. And bear in mind, we've already said, we don't know a great deal about these things, which is why the research is so important. The third question is looking at the experiences and factors that enable young people to develop their full potential, and whether this varies across those 3 cohorts that have been identified. And then the fourth one is really looking at the social ecosystem functioning at different levels, the individual, the institution, and the community level, and how that can enable young people to flourish. So in terms of putting the research methodology around those, we decided that we needed 5 different strands. These are in the white boxes. So I'll just say a little bit about what each of those is. So strand 1 is analysis of ILR data. I'm going to guess that most people in this meeting are much more familiar with ILR data than I am, actually. But if you don't know what it is, the individualized learner record is information that colleges provide throughout the year that is basically saying, you know, who their learners are and what sort of educational training program they're on. We might also draw on National People Database, and really that strand is about looking at the national data sets that can help to tell us about the learner profile of these young people. So the purpose is to build a national picture of who they are, where they are, what they're studying. Strand 2 is the survey. And I'm actually not going to say anything very much about the survey, because Julia is going to speak about that for the next slide. And as Kath said right at the beginning, we're going to have quite a lot more to say about the survey in this session. I will only say, therefore, that the point of the survey is to try and provide us with more information about 14 to 16 provision in individual colleges. Strands 2 and 3 and 4 are linked by the fact that they all involve direct contact with colleges. And strand 3 involves conceptual interviews with stakeholders. So these will be interviews with senior leaders. We anticipate using 20 colleges, and they will be representative of the 14 to 16 provision. So by that, I mean in terms of the cohorts they offer, whether they offer all 3 of those or 1 or 2. Things like location, whether they're urban, rural, coastal, the size of the college. And those interviews will have the purpose of giving us a more detailed understanding of the day-to-day experience of these young learners, and also the challenges or benefits to the colleges in offering this type of provision. So it will begin to give us as well some understanding of the wider community in which 14 to 16 operates. And then strand 4, these are case studies. So here we're looking at really having a far more nuanced understanding of all of the aspects of the college experience. So we plan to use 8 colleges, which again will be representative of what we discover in the sector. And in this strand, we'll be meeting with a range of teaching and support staff, potentially with governors, employers or local authorities. and we'll hear from the learners themselves. So we've designed the learner interactions using workshop type activities, and that's so that the young people can really engage with the research. This project is definitely not going to be something that is done to them. It will be very much something that they can co-create, so that they have an opportunity to give us a genuine understanding of the role that college is playing in their lives. It's our intention to meet with learners more than once, so that we'll have a longitudinal element to the research. And we also hope to meet with parents, though we know that can be difficult. And then finally, strand 5, it says here, synthesis of findings. This is where we will merge the data from strands 1 to 4. And the structure of this methodology might look a bit complicated, but it's designed really to allow for a triangulation of data across all elements. So this final stage, merging the findings, will ensure that we'll be drawing our conclusions on data that's supported by more than one element. So as an example, the national databases in themselves right at the beginning can provide us with a picture of 14 to 16 learners, but we also have data from strands 3 and 4 that allow us to make an informed interpretation of that national picture. And then finally on this slide, at the right-hand side, that box is just giving an indication of some of the outcomes and dissemination that we anticipate the data and the findings will give us. And I'll hand over there to Julia.
Thank you very much, Susan. So this is the exciting bit. This is where you guys get involved. So there are a number of ways where we will rely on your help with this piece of research. But the very first one, and the one I want you thinking about most today, is the survey, which we are hoping to get out to you over the next couple of days or so. It's very nearly at the stage where we'll be landing in your inbox, so expect that basically imminently. It's very much the first opportunity to get involved, and we have tried our absolute hardest to make it as easy and as quick to complete as is possible. It is absolutely anonymous, so nothing you say in your answers will be in any way identifiable or be able to trace back to your institution or to yourself. There is an opportunity, if you want to be involved further, to do that in the end, but whether or not anything you answer is anonymous will not be affected by what you say there. But it really is very important that you fill this in. We rely on you to get the information about the provision that you offer, and therefore we can't really look at anything unless you tell us. So what does it cover? It covers a really broad range, although, like I said, it's very quick and easy for you to complete. It does look at all 3 kinds of provision that Kath mentioned right at the outset. It also looks at the full range of learners that are involved in this kind of provision. It also covers anything from sort of subject areas and curriculum strands that you might be looking at, but also what sort of support you offer alongside that provision. Also what it is that you do and consider in terms of the progression of those learners, both when they come to you, but then also when they move on from that type of provision. And then crucially, of course, you couldn't do any sort of research without the word coming up at least once. We will also look at the impact that COVID has had and may yet have on both the learners and the kind of provision that you have. So as you can tell from really important themes that we're looking at here, it really is very important that you help us out with this. So when this comes into your inbox, I would very much urge you to spend what won't be more than a couple of minutes to try and fill this in and help us fill in those knowledge gaps that we know exist in this kind of provision. And with that, I hand you back to Lynn to tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Julia. I mean, in truth, it is going to take a little bit longer than a couple of minutes. I think we
5. Let's go with 5.
I think it's probably going to take about 15 minutes. We have got some open-ended questions there, so it might depend a little bit on how much you want to write. Just to add what Julia said, we are going to look at the linked NPD and ILR data so that we can get a sense of what students are doing before they came to college, know a little bit more about their social backgrounds and so on. What we do fully anticipate is there's going to be loads of gaps in the data that the government hold, particularly around, you know, given the sort of challenging trajectories that some of these young people have, that the government don't know, you know, how they don't actually know how many young people are educated at home. They don't really know necessarily where they are. So it's really, I know you might not get very excited about doing a survey, but this is a really, really important survey. It's going to enable us to sort of map this provision and to try and work out where these young people are. And also it could be really helpful in highlighting to government that actually they've got to do something much stronger about how they work with some of these young people and how they collect data. So it should be quite straightforward to complete. There are a few things you just might want to look up, a little bit about staffing and those types of things, but we're really hoping that you'll have all of this information in your head. And then, we will be producing an analysis of the report, and we're hoping to do that late in the summer, and this will be shared across everybody. So what we really want with this research is to work with you, and certainly work with the young people, and to make the everything that we do as transparent as possible in terms of sharing the findings. And we would also hope that when this report is produced based on the survey, that it might be helpful for you to sort of benchmark or look at different types of provision, and just to understand what people are doing. So we think we've tested it loads of times. We hope the bugs are out, and it should be landing in your inboxes tomorrow, I hope. And Kath, I think it's back to you now.
It certainly is. So finally then, after the survey, which we very much hope that you'll all get involved with, there are further ways you can get involved in this project. So as Susan outlined, we will be running conceptual interviews with around 20 providers, and then case studies from 8 providers. Now, it's really important on the conceptual interviews that we get a good range geographically and type of provider and type of provision that's offered, but we'd really be interested in hearing from you. So if you'd like to get involved in one of those conceptual interviews, do please contact me. My email address is there at the bottom, or do pop your details if you wish to in the chat this afternoon, and we'll be sure to get back to you regarding those conceptual interviews and also the case studies. So in terms of the formal presentation, we've given you the overview, encouraged you to get involved with the survey and the other work that we're doing. So it's now over to you for questions. So as part of that, I'm just going to stop sharing. And if you feel that you can, please do put your cameras on so that we can see you. And do we have anyone with any questions?
Hi, I've got a question, hopefully.
Hello, Vicky. Hi.
I work for quite a large group of colleges. We go across 3 different counties. We've got 7 sites that we use. For the survey, do I focus just on kind of our main colleges, one county, or do I do all of them?
Okay. We have, I've noticed, because I can see that you've written to me in the chat. So in terms of Activate Learning, for us, you come up as one college. So Vicky, if you're able to do so, it would be really helpful if you could get all that information from your colleagues across all your different sites and gather it into one response. That would be really helpful for us. Thank you so much.
Brilliant, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we're getting lots of people saying they want to be involved in interviews. Thank you. My goodness, oh my goodness, they can't, lots and lots. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much. That makes our job a lot easier. Does anyone else have any questions about the overall research or what we're doing or why we're doing it?
Hello.
Hi, Ruth.
Hello. I have a question. So I'm the Director of Inclusion for East Sussex College, and we have 3 campuses, and we do all the 3 elements that you've talked about. And I just wondered if part of that research could also be, especially when it's a 14-16 that is dual registered between a college and a school, and any of those difficulties, because obviously they're very different disciplinary policies, different everything. And I just wondered, would that be something later on that could be picked up?
Lynn.
Yeah, I think I mean it's such a challenging issue, isn't it? Particularly for
Yes.
the young people themselves. I think we'd be picking that up further along, you know, when we're having some of the sort of interview questions and doing some of the case studies. It works very differently in different contexts, and some schools are better at sharing them than others.
Yes.
We haven't gone into that in the survey. Partly we're really looking broadly to map the provision, but in terms of coming to visit places and, you know, the contextual interviews, we certainly want to have a look at that. And yeah, I'll say no more. We can talk for longer.
Oh yes, I could go on for hours.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much. Really good question, Ruth. Thank you.
Very sorry, can I just ask, so what proportion of your young people are dual registered, just so I've got flavour?
We're Hastings, Eastbourne and Lewis. So Hastings, there's nearly 40 full-time, 9 till 3, 25 hours a week. Eastbourne's 20 and Lewis is 15.
Okay.
So Eastbourne and Lewis have only started this year, September this year.
I'm just wondering, and I'd welcome everybody's view here. Do you think it would be sensible for us to pop in a question in the survey about that?
I think I would have said so.
Yeah, I can see Sarah nodding. Yeah, okay, we'll do that.
Thank you. That's great. So you're already getting involved in the research. That's brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Ruth. And actually, a bit sneaky. I live quite near you, so I'm based in Worthing down the south coast. So I may well come for a visit just to see what you're doing. I'd be really interested.
More than welcome. Hastings has been running a lot longer, so we're 6 years in Hastings, but those relationships and collaborations with the schools is lovely. But starting that all over again on 2 other campuses is quite difficult.
Quite a challenge, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to go next to James and then to Sarah. So James.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, just following on from what Ruth was saying, I wondered if perhaps maybe even with the stakeholder interviews, there was an idea to include some schools, because I just think that, you know, talking about the impact that colleges have, a lot of that impact is, you know, just so big for schools in terms of not having to sort of reducing the numbers of students that get permanently excluded, for example. I just wondered if they would be kind of included in the stakeholder interviews.
That's really helpful, Lynn.
Yeah, I think, James, that would probably come into play when we were doing the case studies. The idea with the case studies is to really look in depth. We've selected 8, you know, we're hoping to select 8, but so that we could really look in depth at the provision. So it would be interviews with teaching staff, support staff, governors, wider stakeholders, you know, obviously the young people themselves. So I think that's something that we would absolutely pick up there. I mean, the priorities to start off with are really trying to get this overall view, you know, a sense of what the landscape is. And I think when we came to the case studies, that's where we'd be picking up on the school side.
Thanks ever so much, and thanks for that suggestion again, James. I think that's really important, isn't it, in terms of those key stakeholders. Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. Long overdue research, I think we'll all agree. I think the biggest impact I feel is when Ofsted come in and have absolutely no idea what a junior college is. They immediately assume we study Progress 8 and want to know why they're not studying history and everything else. So I just wonder where Ofsted is going to fit into this research anywhere, or even if that's possible, or is it something, you know, a fait accompli that once it's done, you'll then hand it over to Ofsted?
Shall I kick off on that one, Lynn? So Sarah, I think you make a really good question. I would say we get lots of queries from colleges during Ofsted inspections about 14 to 16. And as you know, we offer support to colleges as they're going through Ofsted. And I would say that's probably the most asked question, which, considering actually the balance of provision for 14 to 16-year-olds. So I think 14 to 16-year-olds in college is clearly really, really important, but realistically, it's normally quite a small provision in comparison with everything else. So it's quite interesting that we often get those questions. So I think what we would be doing here is drawing Ofsted's attention to this report in the same way that we would be with DFE. We do also feed back to Ofsted, so we've fed in, you know, the different types of provision that there are, because sometimes I think there is perhaps lack of clarity, the difference between direct entry and alternative provision and the sort of requirements that are required. So actually, in terms of alternative provision, there is very little direction out there. Most of the published guidance is for direct entry, and yet you can see from our slide at the beginning that that's the smallest number of students. So I think one of the things we're looking at is to get more recognition for these students and the role that colleges play in their provision. And so part of that, I think, would be making sure that Ofsted is updated. But as I say, we often get those queries and we're always swift to respond and make sure that people have got the necessary guidance. But in all fairness, there isn't that much guidance out there, but we have slides ready to roll now to answer some of those questions, Sarah. Lynn, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really important things about this is that if we can work together collectively, that's really what we're interested in, then actually being able to get a handle on more data, more information, it will enable, I think, some pushing back sometimes on some of the sort of Ofsted misunderstanding. And if some of that is about, you know, trying to get some information about destinations data, which you will have more on than anyone else, if we can start illustrating the trajectories of young people, then I think there's ways in working together that we can just together, you know, be able to push back on some of the Ofsted, because what we do know that actually some of the early direct entry, you know, the colleges who adopted direct entry, you know, they pulled out of that provision because of concerns about Progress 8 and the impact it was having on overall Ofsted. So what we might find as we go through this is that we actually also develop a language. We develop a way of talking to Ofsted. We have, you know, a body of evidence that we can use. And I think what's also really helpful, because, you know, Kath knows just about everyone and anyone at DFE who moves in this area. So she's, you know, making your case, but we'll be able to make it with data, with informed data, if that makes sense. And even little things like the fact that we are approaching the DFE to have access to the linked MPD and ILR data, and we have to say why and what it is that we're doing. We're awareness raising in that context as well. You know, because they're thinking, oh gosh, someone's looking at 14 to 16 in FE, what's that all about? So I think as many opportunities as we can to promote this, we'll be doing, and we generally do want to be quite active doing, you know, seminars and presentations, and we'll be holding at the end of this, jumping ahead of myself, but there we go, you know, we will be having some sort of big collaborative conference that we can talk about and discuss the findings and the implications and things like that.
Thanks very much, Lynn. Yeah, I mean, just to give an example, you'll be aware that with the SEND Green Paper, it actually covers SEND and alternative provision, and they are very keen to hear from, so college provision makes up a considerable amount of alternative provision in Key Stage 4. And so they are really keen to hear more. And actually, we've got colleagues from the department sitting on our advisory group. So we very much hope to be able to help shape and influence thinking as it's going forward, because it's a really pivotal time, particularly in terms of alternative provision. Mubin, you had a question for us.
Hi, Catherine. Hi, everyone. I've got two questions. One of them is, would there be a conversation around pupil premium funding where students are late arrivals and they're speaking with a virtual school? And secondly, is the curriculum model. One of the difficulties that we face each year when we're planning the curriculum is because students are joining new to the study program each and every week, it's sometimes very difficult if it's on a vocational course that the assignment hand-in or handout dates are reaching an endpoint, or you have very able students who join very late in the year, so therefore it's not really suitable for the put on a GCSE study program because of the guided learning hours. But it's a model that I'm having to tweak every year based around the cohort of learners that we're receiving on a weekly basis. This year, we've looked at introducing unit award scheme. Now, it does, based on student feedback, they've mentioned that they would like to study or be exposed to other subjects other than just English and maths, the core subjects. However, I'm aware that unit award scheme doesn't hold as much weight, but the students have shown an interest. It's easy to put up a study program where we have the GCSE history, geography, etc. But again, it comes down to we're not able to predict the numbers or the ability of learners until a week beforehand when we find out from the local borough Newham, the students that are coming in, we put them through some sort of initial diagnostic assessment. So therefore, the model is something which I'm struggling to find that fits, especially for students who are joining each week in, week out up until July. So just the question around the curriculum model as well. Is there a one fit suits all, or is there a deeper conversation that's required?
So I think that's really interesting, Mubin, and one of the reasons we really want you to get involved in the survey, because actually what we would like to look at is, so our report, part of our report will be focusing on what people are offering, what sort of curriculum they're offering to the different types of provision. So I'm not necessarily sure that we've got all those answers now, but that's definitely something that we want to be focusing on and finding out more. And we would also be following up in terms of the interviews. The other thing, Mubin, is if you contact me, we actually have a 14 to 16 group, which it's quite a small group, which meets primarily to look at direct entry, but actually we often get wider interest as well in that particular group. So if you're interested, I could definitely put you in contact with another colleague or another college, or perhaps someone on the call today, because that's what's great about these webinars, is if someone on the call today would be interested in having a conversation with you about the sort of offer that they have. But it's very much what we're trying to work out, because we think it will be different depending on where we go around the country, and depending on the type of model. Mubin, having been the person who was trying to persuade the college that we were going to open provision, although we didn't actually have anyone on our books on the 1st of September, but we knew that by the 1st of October, we'd have 20 people. I really do feel for sort of where you are. And I know, that sort of thing is really, really difficult, which is why it makes this provision challenging. So do be in contact to really help. It's a really good question. Thank you.
And the numbers, have significantly, we're based on the three-year trend where come November, we've normally had about 50 odd students. Right now, we're close to surpassing over the 100 mark. And this has bucked the trend. I reckon that COVID and Brexit had a part to play. So it's that revisiting the model to see what is suitable, accommodating. And again, it's really hard in terms of financing this, because you're basing it on predictions or how many staffing you require as well. And utilization is something that every FE college will be familiar with, that you've got to get staff utilization at a certain point. But it can be difficult when you cannot predict your numbers or the guided learning hours for the program.
So I can see lots of other people nodding. So I suspect you're not the only one in that position. So do please be in contact, and we'll see if we can connect you up with someone else so that you can have a conversation about the sort of curriculum. But again, it's really helpful information for us, because it's definitely something we can look at when we're going through not just the survey, but when we're going into our interviews and case studies as well. So just looking around the virtual room now, I don't see any more hands up. We've seen lots of, quite a lot of information in the chat. So Sarah's just said that they would be interested at East Kent College in any collaboration and working groups. So Sarah, yes, your colleague Neela is involved in our group, so she already comes to our group. But perhaps you could have that conversation with Mubin, who was just asking about curriculum models. So perhaps, there's an opportunity here for people to connect up. Do we have any further questions from anyone in the virtual room? So before we finish, just checking with Lynn, Susan, Josie and Julia, was there anything else that I should have mentioned or that we should have mentioned that we haven't as yet?
I think because of the immense amount of interest in this room, which is spectacular and really, really great. It's probably helpful just to give a little bit of sense of the timescale. So what we really hope to do is get the survey out this week and have that coming back. That it's on the slides. And the idea would be then hopefully to try and schedule some online contextual interviews from, you know, in March, Aprilish, with a view to trying to then whittle down and decide on the 8 case studies so that they could be visited in the summer term. It's tight. We know the timescale's tight, but that was for reasons beyond our control. But just so you've got a sense of what that would look like, and then if you were involved in terms of the case studies, we'd want to then visit you probably the following spring, if that makes sense. Partly so that we can have a slight longitudinal element in terms of talking to students and talking to staff, but just to build up that broader picture.
Thanks very much, Lynn. Okay, in that case, as Lynn says, it's so amazing to see so many people on the call this afternoon and the interest in this particular work. Thank you so much, because if you're working in 14 to 16, you don't have a minute to yourselves. So the fact that you've managed to spare the time to come and be with us this afternoon, we're extremely grateful, because I know it's extremely busy work. And I know sometimes it's 5 steps backwards before you make 3 going forwards. But you know, I also know the incredible work that you do, and the impact that it has on young people, and ensuring that they get that really good progression at 16. So thanks ever so much to all of you for coming onto the webinar today. If you have any further questions, we've got your details, so we will be sending out the slides, and you can always contact me at AOC, and I'll be more than happy to be in contact with you. Thanks ever so much, everybody. It's been a real pleasure to see you this afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.